Archives of Prasar Bharati presents the timeless treasure of golden era.
We would like to know in detail about your involvement in the Congress activities and the underground activities both.
My involvement in active politics lasted for about 9 years. As I told you, I resigned my job as the headmaster of Sanskrit High School run by Sri Ramakrishna Mission at Kaldi and joined the August movement. Travancore being comparatively quiet in those days, I went to Trichure, and from there, along with a few friends, I participated in the student strike, demonstrations and other activities around Trichure. This went on for about 2 months. Then I joined the Bombay group and was entrusted with the work of producing their underground weekly, which was being published as the mouthpiece of KPCC, Kerala Provincial Congress Committee, which was defunct at that time. Along with Sri V. Kesavan Nair, I went to Calicut and stayed at Talacheri for some time, was in Kannur, got this journal printed and distributed it throughout Kerala, and we were able in the course of about 8 to 10 months to produce about 20 issues of this journal. Then most of the workers in this movement were involved in what is known as the Kizharur bomb case, and they were got arrested. Somehow or other I escaped arrest, and I took up a part-time teacher's job in Calicut as a cover and did something to defend the case. During that period, we also organized a cover organization under the innocuous name Grama Seva Sangham, with Calicut as the headquarters. This Grama Seva Sangham had local branches almost throughout the district of Malabar and functioned as a parallel Congress organization. The government also prevented Grama Seva Sangham from functioning by the end of 1943, and a camp organized by the Sangham at Angadipuram in December 1943, in which I was present and I was supposed to be the camp leader, was raided by the police, and the records including my lecture notes were seized. Other officers of Grama Seva Sangham were also raided by the police. I stayed in Calicut till April 1944, when the judgment in the case of Kizharur bomb case was delivered. Afterwards, there was a lull in the movement, and I went to Kodagara in Cochin state near Trichure, where I stayed for about 5 months. A new high school under the name National High School was started there, and I was offered a teacher's post. Working as a teacher, I continued my political work there. It was at this place Mr. Pradivadi Bhayangara Venkatacharya, of whom you referred to, came into contact with us.
Was he involved in this?
Yes, he was a freedom fighter from Andhra, and previously he had been in the Andaman jails for some time. He was exiled, and from that jail he had written a book about the life in the Andaman jails named Craig's Paradise, to which Rajaji had contributed an introduction. So this gentleman wanted to go to Singapore somehow or other and join Subhash Chandra Bose to carry on the fight against the British. He wanted 2 things from us: to procure a qualified boat mechanic from somewhere near Cochin, and also to get an introduction letter to Captain Lakshmi, who was one of the most famous leaders of INA. We managed to give him these 2 things, but somehow or other he could not succeed in his mission. Well, that was my connection with Pradivadi Bhayangara Venkatacharya. He had formed an secret organization called We Don't Betray India, and we were also involved in that movement for some time. That
You were a
organization
member
for
of
some time. Well, of course, anybody can become a member provided he signed a pledge with his own blood, something like that. It was a secret organization.
Do you remember any other writer of Kerala who associated with this movement?
Oh, at that time, Sanjayan was very closely associated with us in the conduct of this Swatantra Bharatam. At Tellicherry, we used to meet him quite often, and he used to contribute articles and poems to our weekly, underground weekly. He was a very ardent supporter of our movement. Poetic was also there as a friend of myself and Sri Keshavan Nair. He knew what we did, but he was not actually involved in it. Then, after 4 months in Kodagara, I went to Madras and joined the University of Madras, Department of Malayalam of the University of Madras as a research student. There, through the good offices of Mrs. Krishnabai Nimkar, who was a social worker, I got into contact with various underground organizations in Madras and outside. In her residence, I met Mrs. Aruna Asafali, Sri Achyut Patwardhan, and Sri Ashok Mehta, who were guiding the movement from underground.
Did you meet Jayaprakash?
Jayaprakash Narayan was not there at that time. To begin with, he was in jail, then he somewhere in Nepal or somewhere, then again he was arrested. So he was not here. He didn't come to South India. At the request of one of the workers in Madras, Mr. S.R. Subramaniam, who lately became a Gandhian worker, I went to Chinganallur and in Tamil Nadu and worked for regrouping the disrupted nationalist textile mill workers union there for some time. In Madras I lived for 3 years till April 1947. Along with doing my research work in the university, I was connected with various political and social organizations in Madras, took active role in the Kerala unification movement, and participated in the Aikya Kerala conference at Bombay held in March 1947. It was inaugurated by Achyut Patwardhan and addressed by Jayaprakash Narayan. Then there was also another Aikya Kerala conference in Madras, in which also I took a prominent part. In April 1947, I came back to Kerala and with Trichur as my headquarters, plunged in the activities of the Socialist Party. I was associated with Jai Hind, a weekly journal of the Socialist Party, as the manager and later as printer, publisher and editor. This paper was suppressed by the government of Cochin and I was prosecuted in the court. But in the end, the police withdrew the case. I accompanied Jayaprakash Narayan and Achyut Patwardhan in their tours of Kerala as interpreter. I became also active in the teachers movement, became the secretary of Cochin Teachers Association, editor of weekly Janayugam, which was being published as the mouthpiece of the Cochin Aided Primary Teachers Association. Gradually, the socialist movement in Kerala lost its momentum and split into RSP, KSP, and even ISP had 2 branches, one in Malabar and one in Cochin. And politics, from being a mission, became more and more a profession or a career. Then I lost interest in routine day-to-day party politics and went back to teaching, my old profession. Finally, in August 1951, I opted for journalism as my profession and left politics for good.
Now, in spite of your association with the terrorist movement and underground activities, how could you escape arrest?
Well, I was very new, fresh to this politics because I had been working either at Tripunithura or in a small village like Chovara or at Kaladi as a teacher in a very quiet way. Before August 10, 1942, I had not been in any of the active fields of politics. That is one thing. Secondly, when there was a warrant of arrest against me in Trichur, I shifted to Calicut, Tellicherry and Kannur, where I was completely unknown. Then I was a very lean person, small in stature, very unimpressive.
You mean physical state?
Physically. That way I could escape attention in any crowd.
What do you feel about the change in the national conditions after independence?
The changes are so vast. Before independence, the only goal, which was a very concrete, very visible, very powerful goal before the entire nation, was the achievement of freedom. There was a proven leader, Mahatma Gandhi, to lead the country. Every day his message, his clarion call came through thousands of journals and all sorts of media to every person. So there was a sort of unanimity among the people. There was clarity of the goal which had to be reached, and the program also was very clearly chalked out. Of course, there were 3 or 4 different paths, but people had no difficulty to choose one of these programs. After independence, there was a sea change. Politics became mostly professional, and the end was capturing power and retaining it. Of course, there were the nation building activities. They merged with the administrative activities and became, so to say, not very attractive, routine sort of thing. Voice of Gandhiji was silenced. Then the great inheritor of Gandhiji, Jawaharlal Nehru, also departed the scene. Issues became confused. Problems began to loom large and indistinct. The national consensus was lost, and gradually those persons in whom the masses of the people had implicit faith also vanished from the scene one by one. The situation where we find ourselves now, it is not a completely a political phenomenon. It is also a cultural phenomenon, a social phenomenon, a phenomenon embracing all aspects of our physical, economic, mental, cultural life.
But all these are only to be expected, I think. After independence, there won't be a consensus that the elders will pass away one by one. What was the role of the leftist movement in correcting these evils as you have listed them?
Speaking about the leftist politics, I had been nurtured in Gandhian politics. Then gradually I was attracted to the ideas expounded by Jawaharlal Nehru, and it was through his writings that we imbibed the concept of socialism and also some idea about the development of world history itself. In fact, Nehru was the great teacher of history for the people of my generation. Then in the early 40s, the writings of Marx, Lenin and Stalin and other communist tracts became available in India. Many of my friends were tempted to join the communist movement, but somehow or other I did not have that temptation, because more or less my political ideas had clarified, solidified by that time. The great ideas of national freedom, secularism, socialism, democracy, and the non-violent method of achieving these ideas, these had a very firm hold on my convictions. Even now, I don't feel that India is ready for a violent revolution or India will benefit from a violent revolution. Of course, we have to evolve slowly. This is a huge nation, almost half of it illiterate, all sorts of religions. At every level of culture, you find groups of people mutual recriminations, all those things are there. Expected, of course, in a poor, big, ancient country. These things are possible, these things are inevitable. And we have to grow slowly by patient work. We have to build up a democratic conscience.
Do you believe that using these non-violent techniques and the democratic way of life, we can modernize India with the help of the intellectuals and the social workers?
Well, that is the only way to modernize India, because modernization should begin in the minds of the people. Unless there is a change of heart, as Gandhi said, nothing will be achieved. As the UNESCO proclamation says, wars begin in men's mind. Therefore, the seeds of peace have to be sown in the mind of people. In the same way, the seeds of socialism, the seeds of democracy, the seeds of economic progress, the seeds of secularism, all these seeds have to be sown in the minds of the millions of our people who are mostly illiterate, very poor, have very little education, have no idea of what is taking place outside their own small village. So this is a patient, slow work which will have to be done, carried on by at least a large number, millions of patient, disinterested workers.
Is that the reason why you left activism and came to journalism, that you can play a new role as an intellectual?
Even while I was in politics, I had no political ambitions. Party politics I felt to be irrelevant after the attainment of freedom in 1947. I thought as a teacher I may be able to do something, and my interest in literature was also part of this interest in teaching. From the very beginning I thought that literature is a very powerful medium to educate people, to enlighten them, to rouse them to action, and to transform society. The Gandhian idea of literature had a great influence on me. I had a very narrow classical literary education. Then when I studied Hindi, through the media of Hindi, I got into touch with some of the great writers of modern India. Premchand in Hindi, Tagore and Sharat Chandra Chatterjee in Bengali, Dijendralal Rai of course, and several others. Gandhiji had been connected with the literary movement in 1930s as the president of Hindi Sahitya Sammelan and also as the president of Bharati Sahitya Sammelan. And I think Mr. K. M. Munshi and Premchand, they were the secretaries of Bharati Sahitya Sammelan, of which Mahatma Gandhi was the president. And it was this organization which popularized the idea of progressive literature in India to begin with in 1936 or 37. At that time the national goal was independence, and Gandhiji made it very clear that unless literature enthused people for national fight, for the national revival, then literature is of little use. So I thought that by engrossing myself in literary pursuits, I may be able to serve my country better. That is how I got attracted into journalism. When I had some experience of it, I thought that perhaps that is my mission, in which I could contribute much more than in any other walk of life.
It was with Mathrubhumi that you had the longest of associations.
Yes.
As a journalist.
For 19 years I was in Mathrubhumi.
What made you come back from Madras to Calicut?
In Madras I had no roots.
Incidentally, what is the topic of research?
My research? Oh, it was a technical topic. The meters, Malayalam meters. My subject of research in Madras was Malayalam meters. I prepared a thesis and got my degree of eminent for that thesis.
Who was the guide?
Dr. Chelnat Achumenon was the guide. He was the head of the department of Malayalam at that time. Then after several years, when I became the senior fellow of Dravidian Linguistic Association, I took up that subject again and wrote a book, A History of Malayalam Meter.
That is much late.
Much late. That was in 1978 or so. In that I have given a comparison of the different metrical systems of Dravidian languages and also have described the peculiar metrical system of Malayalam language.
Coming from Madras, you worked for some time in the Kerala Sahitya College.
Yes, when I thought of going back to teaching profession, I got a job in the Kerala Sahitya College as a tutor in the Malayalam department.
Who was the principal?
Principal was Professor Shankaranambiyar and Professor Unni. D. Panavan Unni was the professor of Malayalam. Then I worked as tutor for about 1 year, became a lecturer there, and for about 3 years I was in Kerala Sahitya College. Then I shifted to Mathrubhumi.
Now, who was instrumental in bringing you to Mathrubhumi?
When Kesavamenon came back from jail and took up the editorship of Mathrubhumi, he asked me whether I would like to join Mathrubhumi. I said yes, but then nothing happened. When Kesavamenon left Mathrubhumi as the High Commissioner of India in Ceylon and Mr. V.M. Nair became the editor, he wanted me to join Mathrubhumi, and Kurur Neelakandan Namboodiripad, managing director, came to my house in Trichy and asked me to join Mathrubhumi. That was how I joined Mathrubhumi in 1951, and I was put in charge of the Illustrated Weekly.
How long were you there?
Well, I was for 19 years I was in Mathrubhumi, from 1951 to 68, and then after an interval from 79 to 1981. So that was my longest career in one establishment.
Even now, Mathrubhumi Weekly is supposed to be the standard literary journal in Malayalam. Have you anything to say about your experiences in building up that assistant?
Mathrubhumi Weekly was from the very beginning the foremost literary and cultural journal in Malayalam, and it had a very illustrious row of editors, Mr. Narayan Nair, and Kelapan, then Mayrar was in charge of it for some time, and others. When I came, Mr. P.K. Raman was the editor. So I had a very onerous responsibility. I had to maintain the standard and also to improve the circulation. And I think I have been able to achieve these two objectives. During my period, I could raise the standard and acquire some fame as an editor, as a literary editor. And the circulation also went up. I was able to serialize a large number of very good novels and also very serious science literature, like the translation of world we live in, something like that. So without lowering the standard, maintaining high seriousness, I could increase its popularity by giving quality literature week after week.
How did your background of public activities and public contact help you in mobilizing the writer's talents?
That my background helped me very much in my career as a journalist, because I had personal contact with almost all writers of some importance in Kerala, and on a personal level I could encourage them, I could cajole them, I could compel them to write in Mathrubhumi Weekly.
Several of the new writers in Kerala have acknowledged their indebtedness to NV, bringing them up.
It is largely because of their kindness. Anyway, I took editing seriously. I have never published a piece without reading carefully, correcting if there are any mistakes, and also even if I did not agree with the content, if I was not convinced about the cogency of the argument. So I took editing very seriously and took great pains to correct mistakes to refer to sources and correct mistakes. That way, I could also point out to new writers how to improve their manuscripts and all those things. And most of the writers were grateful for that sort of service rendered to them. They did not resent it. Only very few people resented editing.
Was it an extension of your teaching career?
Probably the same teaching zeal was there.
Which gives you more satisfaction, teaching or editing?
Both. Because when you are teaching, you are with live students, live personalities. But when you are editing, of course there is a gap of a week or two before you face living character, living people. Even while you are editing, after a week when the thing gets printed and circulated, you will have to face living people. That way, literary journalism can be considered as an extension of literary teaching.
We would like to know the circumstances in which you left Mathrubhumi and came to the Language Institute, Trivandrum.
Yes, even in Mathrubhumi, I was interested in planned development of literature and language. I thought that planning can be applied with equal success to literary and cultural matters as to economic matters. It was in 1956, in a meeting presided over by Sri E.M.S. Namboodiripad near Pattambi, that I presented a paper how through 5-year plans the Malayalam literature, especially the knowledge informative part of it, can be developed. A 5-year plan for the development of Malayalam literature, that was the theme of the paper. This paper I presented in 1956. This I enlarged and was again presented at the Sahitya Parishad meeting at Ernakulam in 1956. This was very widely discussed. Some people thought that creative literature cannot be developed through planning and planned activity. I said that of course it may not be possible in the field of creative writing, but there is a vast untouched field of informative literature which can be developed in the regional languages only through planned activity at the state level. So in 1968, when the Central Education Minister Dr. Trigun Sen gave a grant of 1 crore of rupees to each state to develop informational literature in the regional languages and prepare university level textbooks in various subjects in the regional languages. I thought that in Malayalam it is an attempt, a very, very important step forward, and if possible I should associate myself with it. This idea, I met Mr. E.M.S. Namboodiripad, who was the Chief Minister of Kerala at that time, and discussed the matter with him. And that was how I was taken into the governing board of Language Institute first, and then later on was made the director of it and was asked to set up the institute at Trivandrum.
I think there also your public activities were of great help, because as the director of the workshops run by the Sahitya Samiti and the Kendra Kala Samiti, Calicut, you are harping on such themes.
Well, in 1962, some of us here in Calicut formed a nucleus out of which the organization called Shastra Sahitya Parishad developed. This organization was interested in getting good scientific books published in Malayalam, Shastra Sahitya Parishad, and also to give training to writers about scientific matters. Shastra Sahitya Parishad in 1967 took up a project of preparing a technical and scientific glossary in Malayalam, and we prepared a glossary as a scientific glossary, and as an experiment published this through the Mathrubhumi Weekly. That way we had prepared the background for making a plan and implementing it for the development of a scientific literature in Malayalam, even before the idea of Bhasha Institute was there. So when the idea came and the opportunity came, here was a set of people who were ready to undertake that work and to carry it forward.
Of course, NV is known to have studied more than 18 languages The story goes, when we learned a language in March and began to teach it in May. Of course, no wonder you became the director of the Language Institute. But I have a question. How was it that you were able to harmonize the old Sanskrit classical learning with the new scientific information and the explosion of knowledge and all that?
I don't know, the story about 18 languages is an exaggeration.
In fact, how many do you know?
I have studied Sanskrit, then I have studied English, German. From Sanskrit I have branched off to Prakrit and Pali and all those things. Hindi I know, Bengali I used to read, Tamil I can read and speak to some certain extent. Then Kannada I can read. I had tried to study Urdu and Telugu and even Russian, but most of these languages I have forgotten. Russian entirely I have forgotten, but German language I remember a little. Well, this is the range of my acquaintance with languages.
So you know 16 languages.
No, sir, may not be 16, something about a dozen maybe. But that is, anybody can do that. My Sanskrit education or my classical education helped me in this way, because by studying Sanskrit grammar, I have imbibed perhaps a method of condensing and systematizing and grasping things, perhaps. That way, perhaps may be able to read and understand and then reproduce books in other languages about modern subjects, something like that.
Do you think there is a basic human linguistic structure which makes it possible to learn many languages?
By learning one language properly, you will be equipped to learn about other languages also, because most of the languages, of course there are differences. Chinese is a very different proposition, but most of the languages have more or less the same pattern. And as Chomsky says, the human brain has been programmed to grasp languages. Which language is only a very later choice. You can choose your language only after you are born, but the programming is done even while the embryo is being developed. That is what Chomsky and modern linguists like him say. Anyway, by properly studying the grammar and the usage of one language, it becomes very easy for you to learn other languages and their grammars and all those things.
But still the question remains how you are able to imbibe scientific information.
By being in the profession of journalism, I have to read wide. I have to keep abreast with the explosion of knowledge. Then, as a journalist, I got tremendous opportunities to come into contact with various types of people. Perhaps the most important gift journalism gave me was the opportunity to travel. I traveled extensively in India at government expense, met sources of information wherever they are. I went to the Lackady Islands and that was my first tour as a journalist. Then I extensively traveled in Kerala, then North UP and other places. Then I got an invitation from the government of United Kingdom, and in 1958 for 2 months we had a very extensive tour of Britain, stayed in Wales, saw educational institutions and all sorts of all aspects of British life we were allowed to peep into. From Britain I went to Europe, Paris, Rome, all these places. Then in 1959 I got an invitation from the United States government to conduct a study tour of United States. That was very extensive. 3 months I spent in United States and the Far East, Japan, Singapore and Ceylon and other places. I visited Russia twice, in 1967 as a journalist and in 1972 as a Soviet Land Nehru Award winner. I have also invited to visit Bihar extensively and intensively along with two great writers, Bimal Mitra of Bengal and Agilan of Tamil. So that way I have also had an opportunity to visit the Gulf countries. That way journalism brought to me opportunities to visit places And wherever I went, I said that I was interested in education. So I got opportunities to visit universities, centers of knowledge and libraries, something like that. Then I had to read extensively, as I said, on about all subjects. And this has continued for the last about 30 years. That way I have become eclectic. I may not know completely, fully about one subject, but I know something of everything. And that way I have become a successful journalist.
Of course, at the Language Institute, you are often an encyclopedic source of reference on all topics. Now, what is your impression of the actual work turned out by the Institute?
Turning to the Language Institute, I am very satisfied with what I could achieve there in the 6 and odd years of my association with that institute, because we could prepare the ground for bringing the entire informative literature into Malayalam. The work in connection with the scientific and technical terminology was very excellent, because before that several attempts had been done, but there were all sorts of controversies and very little was achieved. But now there is no controversy, and the scientific and technical terminology has been almost universally accepted by all sorts of writers in Malayalam. Of course, a lot is to be done in the field again, but the basic principles have been unanimously approved. That is one thing. Then we prepared the outlines of about 1,000 works of university level in different branches of knowledge. By the time I came from there, about 360, I think it was 364 books had already been published, and now several more books have also come out. I think about 800 books they have been able to publish, which is a really tremendous achievement. There were also all sorts of problems. Printing of mathematics books have their own problems. Expressing mathematical formulae in Malayalam, that has its own problems. All sorts of technical problems have been sorted out collectively, collaboratively. Then we were able to have a keyboard of the typewriter for the reformed script. Of course, the script reform was also started in a humble way through the Madhurumi Weekly, which later the government took up and brought to completion. Now this keyboard is the gateway to introduce machines into composing and transmission of information. That way it has a very definite importance. Well, of course there was a shorthand system in Malayalam, but we were able to develop it and also to make it public. Before that, shorthand system in Malayalam was the private property of one individual or an organization, a small organization. Now it has become the property of the people, and anybody may take it up, may produce books in that system, teach that system, and nobody need to pay any copyright for exercising this shorthand system. Well, that way the Language Institute has done signal service, even revolutionized informative literature in Malayalam. That is my honest opinion.
What was the response of the university and the authorities regarding the switch over to the native language as a medium of instruction?
Well, that is a very sorry tale. The government of Kerala has declared several times that the medium of administration in Kerala will be Malayalam, but this has not been implemented. The universities have declared, the Kerala University as well as the University of Calicut have declared that Malayalam will be made a medium of examination, and they said that they will print question papers in Malayalam, which they have not done. But students gradually have formed an idea that it is much better to use the Malayalam medium for their examinations. Now, mostly in humanities, they read the books prepared by the State Institute of Languages and others in the mother tongue, and many of the students also write their answers in Malayalam and get their degrees. But the organized universities and also the government seem to be very reluctant to bring about this proclaimed goal of medium change. It's a very sad state of affairs.
From the Language Institute, took over the editorship of Kungumam.
From Language Institute, when I left Language Institute, the Dravidian Linguistic Association of Trivandrum offered me a senior fellowship. I utilized it to brush up my previous work about meters. I went to Mathura and worked in the Mathura University Library and prepared my History of Malayalam meter, which contains a comparison of the metrical systems of the Dravidian languages and also a complete description of the metrical system of Malayalam language. That fellowship lasted for 1 year. From there I took up the editorship of Kungumam. Then for a short period of about more than 2 years I came to Madhubhumi, and after that I joined Kungumam again in 1981, where I am continuing at present.
Now, we would like to know about your association with the Jnanapitha Award Committee and your activities there to secure honor for Malayalam.
Yes, as the editor of Mathrubhumi Weekly, I was closely associated with the radio station at Calicut, and Mr. Krishnamurthy was one of my friends. Krishnamurthy was the station director here. At that time I think he was the assistant station director. Well, I don't know whether through his good offices I was invited to the Akashvani Sahitya Samaroh in Delhi consecutively for 3 years or so, where I could meet and get to know very distinguished writers from almost all languages in India. Perhaps that was the reason why when they set up the Jnanpith Award, I was asked whether I would serve as an advisor for Malayalam language, Malayalam literature, which I agreed. Then I think it was in 1962 that they started this Jnanpith Award business. There was a small advisory committee for Malayalam, of which I was the convener. The other two members were Shurnath Kunjanpillai and Dr. S.K. Nair of Madras University to begin with. This association with the Jnanpith Award continued for about 1968 or so, till I left Madhubhumi and took up the work in Bhasha Institute. I was also instrumental in introducing some of our great writers, Malayalam writers, through the Jnanpith committee to the wider Indian horizon. And Sri Shankarakurup and Patekad were awarded the time when I was the convener of the Jnanpith Award Committee, Advisory Committee in Malayalam.